Well, the tax levy limit, which was the net result of that whole
Right.
written out calculation, plus the coming school year exemptions equal the maximum allowable tax levy. That's what's gonna get a little dicey for people, because we're really gonna be talking about two different tax levies. You got your first tax levy, which determines your tax levy limit, and then you have your maximum allowable tax levy after you add back in some exemptions for the upcoming school year.
This is
It'll
good
look-
job
I'll
security
show
for
you
you.
the numbers. It's a little easier once you see the numbers. So let's walk you through a calculation. This,
Do we know what all the exemptions are yet?
well, we know what the exemptions are, we don't know exactly how all the rules apply to them.
Apply to it.
Yes,
Right,
that's the
okay.
issue. So these are our real numbers, but like, as I said, they're not, these are not 100% cast in stone. They're going to change probably once some of the determinations are made. Our prior year tax levy is this year's tax levy. We don't know the tax base growth factor yet. It comes out in February, which is really timely when you're working on a budget. But we're gonna assume it's one. If it's a little higher, that's good. So this is kind of worst case scenario. So you multiply that, and they add in your prior year pilot, which is your 11-12 pilot, $65,000. So that brings your total up to $31,149,120. Now you have to subtract off your prior year exemptions. Now, for the first year, those are generally just capital expenses, net of building aid, and any, what's the word I'm trying to think of, tax or, tax certiorari or some other types of judgments against the school district. They don't apply to us because they have to be in excess of 5% of your expenditure budget. So I'm happy to say that we don't have that. So that's not a prior year exemption. So basically, there might be a few other exemptions that we're finding we may be able to add in. There's questions about capital costs in the general fund budget that we may need to add in as a prior year exemption. But right now, the $349,874 basically is our debt service for 11-12 after building aid's been applied. So then you get your adjusted prior year levy, which you see is less than your previous year tax levy. That gets multiplied by your allowable growth factor, which is the 2% number that everybody talks about in the newspaper, bringing us to the $31,415,230. But then unfortunately, you have to subtract off the upcoming year pilots. So if you subtract off the $65,000, you get something about $31,350,230. And that is the tax levy limit. So this will move a little bit over the next couple of months as we go through the process.
I think if you go back a couple of pages, remember when Barb talked about what the levy necessary to support the budget rollover was $34,102? So you're looking at a maximum of $31,350,000. So that's the impact that a levy is having. So, you know, your gap is, you know, yeah, just under $3 million there. So that's a significant challenge when you have
It's huge.
a gap like that.
It's
And
really
again, you know, we keep saying preliminary numbers, please make sure you have that down, that these numbers are, you know, just projections at this point. Is the more we learn, the more solid these numbers will become. But I think that the piece you have to understand is that we have that $2.8 million gap. There's, you know, we're not gonna find millions in these formulas, put it that way.
Right.
The other part with the limit, and again, we're showing you what the 2% limit or the tax levy limit is based on a simple majority. based on the 50% plus one. You know, keep in mind that part of the law does allow you to go beyond that cap with a 60% vote of the public voters. Now that, you know, when you look at our vote last year, it was 58% approval process. So that's some dialogue we can talk about in terms of what that means to us. But I think at this point, we're going to look at the 2% and look at those projections and what it means to reduce, make the reductions necessary to follow that. As I've talked to my colleagues, I see and hear of very few districts that are looking to exceed the 2% at this particular point in time. That may change as we go through what reductions will have to take place in order to support a 2% limit. But, you know, want to make it known that you can go beyond that, but it requires a 60% vote.
And if you don't get that 60%,
You get zero.
you get penalized significantly.
Yes.
So it's a huge risk,
Yes.
Is very large.
right?
Yes.
And that's, you know, it's a huge risk, but plus we're asking our population to pay that much more in taxes when we know full well that they're strapped.
Okay, now, once we calculate that number, once we're certain that number is correct, we have to submit that number to the comptroller's office, SED, and Tax and Finance prior to March 1st for every year. One would think maybe they calculated and see if we did it right. My understanding is that's not quite so. They just receive it. They don't necessarily calculate it and then give us their approval, which begs to question why they want it, but they do. And then, I love this next part, but you are not required to have a proposed budget available by March 1st. But thinking about it, it's really hard not to pretty much know your budget before you pretty much know your levy. So, when I said last week when we met that some of the budget deadline dates might change and shift and be pushed up, they may not necessarily be legally pushed up, but philosophically, we're going to be forced to get there sooner in order to know where we are. And so,
And one of the comments today in a session that I participated in on the tax levy cap was that you're required to submit by March 1st, but it isn't just a one-time requirement. So the conversation there is if you change it, submit another one. And if you change that, submit another one after that until you get to your adopted budget. And then you have your limit that you're submitting. So you're required to submit one. But what they're saying is go beyond that as you get better information. And just submit more. Now, the other part, and that's not in here, is that given the uncertainties here, there may be circumstances where you go beyond what the limit allows, the 2%. And there is part of the law that talks about a clerical error or mistake, or I can't recall the other terminology they use. But if you make a mistake, or a clerical error as they call it, and you're beyond the 2%, you have to take that amount and immediately put it in a reserve to be used to lower taxes the following year. So I think they're saying that this might be a little imperfect, and through that, here is what happens if there are mistakes made, but they're not gonna allow you to utilize that money and spend it if you do make a mistake and go over that 2%.
but we're not quite done with our calculation. So, now, once we've gotten to that point, now we have to look at our upcoming budget year exclusions. And this is the good part, because this is where we get to kind of add them back in. Again, we get to add back in capital expenditures, net of aid. Now, I'm not sure what that number is, because I don't know yet what our building aid is gonna be next year. So it's really hard to determine what your debt service, net debt service number is until you have a building aid number to subtract from it. I also am not 100% sure yet, as I said, because we don't have debt service schedules yet for our new bond issue. So I'm not sure exactly what our principal payment is going to be for the upcoming year. So the best thing I could do was to drop in that same number that was in our current fiscal year. That number's going to change. But, that's a good thing for us, because the higher the capital expenditure net of aid on this side of the calculation is, the better it is for our levy to add it back in, because these figures get added back into the first levy amount, you add it on top. Pension expenditures above 2% also gets to be added back in. This is one of the areas that, the whole reason that they're doing this is theoretically is because they're saying, well, school districts can't control these costs, so it's unfair to cap them. So we're going to exclude them from the cap, and we're gonna let you add them back in once your levy is determined, once your allowable levy limit is determined. We're gonna let you add them back on top, because it's not really your fault. You can't control this, so you should exclude it from your levy limit. But there's a lot of rules about it. And one of the rules is, you can only exclude the pension costs that are above the 2% increase from the previous year. So say hypothetically, our pension contribution cost went from 10% to 12.5. We can exclude the 0.5. Because the difference between 10 and 12 is 2. You don't get anything from the 2, you get what's above the 2, and the above the 2 is the 0.5. So you would get to exclude.
10 to 12 is 20%.
No,
12.5,
12.5,
so 2.5, so you
2.5,
exclude
so
0.5.
you exclude 0.5. So if last year's contribution rate was 10%,
12.
and this year's contribution rate is 12.5%, the increase from last year to this year is 2.5. You get to exclude what's above the 2, or the 0.5.
They're basing on percentage
Basis
points,
points.
not percentage.
Yes, basis points.
So it's pretty significant.
Yeah.
When you look at the expenditure growth in terms of percentage versus that percentage point that they're allowing you, it's huge.
From year to year. So we will be able to exclude some ERS money. The TRS rates, we still don't have a hard rate, we have a range, and the range is below 2%, so that it would appear at this point that there won't be any TRS money to exclude. So we're looking at maybe $45,000.
But even when you come up with this number, you're gonna then have the problem that the public is expecting this to be 2%.
Yes,
And when it starts looking like it's 2.8%,
absolutely,
they're gonna be saying, why is it 2.8%?
yes, they are.
Despite the fact that it's all legal, and it still is limiting us a lot. They're gonna feel a little bit like we were supposed to have no more than 2%, why are we getting 2.8?
That's why I would really encourage everybody to try to educate people as you run into them and call it the allowable levy limit, don't call it the 2% tax cap, because it isn't. They hung this, name on it, and it really is unfair because it isn't, and based on their own required method of calculation, it's really a levy limit calculation, and it's going to be individual to district based upon things that were already preset in your 11-12-year budget. So, and based on your allowable growth factor, and many other things based on, do you have pilots, do you not have pilots, do you have debt service, do you not have debt service, do you have judgments, do you not? So, allowable levy limit is really kind of where we're.
So as publicity goes out from us to the community, written publicity, if we have stuff, if Michelle sends things out, we'll be talking about levy limit, allowable levy limit.
Allowable levy limit, it's a tongue twister. Don't say tax cap.
Hey, Ellen?
So this is the good news, these are our projected exclusions, we get to add this amount of $394,874 onto our tax levy limit, having a total tax levy limit, including exclusions, of $31,745,104. So you can see it actually went up, our allowable levy limit went up. Still very short of our
Still
projected
$3 million
need
short
of
of what,
$35 million. So some of the things that we're gonna be doing over the next several months is, we're gonna continue to review our mandated service and our cost increases. We're gonna take an even closer look, this is sort of first blush of where we are and kind of how it looks. We're gonna really have to take a close look at, the expiration of ERA and, our education and jobs fund monies, how that is going to impact our payroll, the folks that were actually being paid from those proceeds. Continuing, of course, as the superintendent said, to review enrollment and staffing projections, drilling down a little deeper, seeing exactly how staffing and enrollment are linked, and looking at the 3 different levels of projection, as he had indicated in the earlier slide. We're gonna have to really keep looking at massaging the tax cap. Probably shouldn't even have that on there, shame on me. See, it's a habit, that's what people call it, property tax cap, the property tax levy limitation. Keeping folks updated as things change, as numbers become hard, as we know things that we don't know at this point. Assessing school improvement plans and the impact on, you should probably say the 12-13.
Budget, yep.
Well, you got it, no good PowerPoint doesn't have a typo, so we'll have to change that. And analyze the impact of the governor's state aid projection in the proposed budget. Like I said earlier, we really don't know what that's going to be. We're looking at it to be relatively similar to this year's state aid.
Questions, comments, feedback, what you wanna see more of it? Remember, we have a next budget session on December 5th. Again, we'll plan to give you more updated staffing. Is there something you want to see in the meantime that we can begin to prepare?
I just have a question. This time last year, did the governor have, I think last year as we were going into, I think this was in January, we had a pretty good idea from our ambassador group that aid was gonna be greatly reduced. Or we felt the doom and gloom early on. And everybody had a sense of it's gonna be ugly, right? Do we have any messages from the governor's office this early on? And is there any word of that the information that comes from the state is gonna come out any sooner because of these dates getting moved up, or?
Well, it should be,
Like,
the state aid
we're gonna have a budget
information.
by March 1st, is that what, I mean, essentially we're gonna,
Well,
Well, again, I think those dates, that's when we have to submit levy information to the controller's office.
But by that
The
time-
adoption budget is, the final date is April 20th for the adopted budget. So everything is not aligning like you would like it to align. We're not getting information as early as we would like in order to plan appropriately, but we need to follow through on that. What I will say about the governor's piece is last year his budget came out late because of when he took office. We had some preliminary projections. We knew the state had a significant deficit. The deficit is reduced, the state still has a deficit. The governor, because he should, and it's our expectation that he'll come out with an earlier budget proposal, his executive proposal, which will include state aid for schools in that. So, we're hoping to see that in early January. And then we can start looking at our revenue projections even more carefully and really have a good handle on what the budget gap is. We're gonna project the same state aid. I don't expect an increase. I mean, when you look at the state having a deficit, I don't expect an increase. We're hoping there isn't another gap reduction for us. So,
Because I thought that was just on the news the other day, if not last night, that there is a deficit in the state, and it said it will be affecting school districts.
yeah, and they have definitely said that, as I keep saying, foundation aid, the basis of our state aid is the same as it was in 08-09. The only thing that's going to change as far as our state aid goes is that our reimbursement aids are going to fluctuate based on what we've expended in the previous year because of reimbursement aids. So it's possible we might see an increase in some reimbursement aids, or might see a decrease in some reimbursement aids. We are gonna see a gap elimination. It's probably gonna be somewhere around the 4.5 million that we had this year. There's no reason to believe it isn't going to be. Maybe it's going to be the slightly lesser one, just a little over 4 million and change, because maybe they'll go with what was considered our net gap after they had given us back some of our foundation aid. I think it's very fair to say that we have no reason to believe it's going to be any better. We're hopeful that it won't be worse.
And we have, but it sounds like from what you're saying, we have every reason to believe, or many reasons to believe, there will be an increased cut in state aid. That it won't be just a matter of we'll get what we got last year, we'll probably get less.
I think we'll see that we actually theoretically get what we got last year, but I think they're gonna take some of it back. Which I know that sounds a bit convoluted, but you have to, if you think about that, when the runs come out and you start to look at them, the state aid number might be very similar to our state aid number this year. But you gotta read like all the way through the state aid form until you get to the bottom where they show the negatives, and then they just start taking it back. That's the way they do it, they give you everything and then they take it until you get to the bottom and you get
Insurance
it back.
companies do that too.
Keep in
They
mind.
pay me, then they
Take
take
it
money
back.
out of my,
It's the same
out of what they
concept.
pay me every week.
Yeah.
Keep in mind too, that as we go through some enrollment decline, you know, kids drive 8. And so if we have fewer kids, that's gonna be, again, a natural progression of a little bit less aid based on enrollment. Okay, so we will, again, continue to work on our staffing projections, make sure they're aligned. We'll clarify some information that you were asking about this evening. Diane?
Well, as we probably progress further into the budget discussions, the other things that fall into place would be like transportation. Is there a way to work on transportation costs? Duplications of services and consolidation of positions. What about the office staff? Are we finding that there's a person that can conceivably do, the job of 2 people? In the business society, we have to wear many hats. And also, what else was I thinking of? I had contracts here, but I can't remember. But things like that, where we
Okay.
where we could save money perhaps, in other areas, not to, obviously, we wanna try to keep as many teachers as we can, but if we could have, savings, significant savings in other areas of the district perhaps, that, even if it's a little bit, it might help.
Okay. We'll look at those things and we can bring some back. I know the transportation piece, we have eliminated a run in each of the last 2 years. We'll look at,
But what about a different
Schedules.
service provider? Are we tied into Fisher Bus?
we can RFP that, I believe. I
Yeah,
don't,
but we don't,
I'm not sure what, we have a contract
we
with.
could, we've been extending our contracts, and based on the analysis that I've made so far, we probably wanna keep extending our contracts. And that's-
Because the price is good.
I'm not so sure we wanna just put it out there.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm not saying we don't, but it's one of those situations where, they may not be beneficial to us. So,
The more we go out and say we're offering the contract to other people, the more they can say, we're gonna change the terms on which we give you your contract anyways.
well, as soon as we do that, all the terms of the contract are
Right.
subject to negotiation, yeah.
So if we can investigate it and find that our contract is very good compared to other people's, we're better off to just stay with it.
Absolutely. And I would say preliminarily, it's kind of the way it looks. So everybody looks at transportation, and I'm not saying that we can't look at transportation, we're trying to find savings, because we certainly will look at it. I'm not so sure that's where we're gonna find it.
But as far as some of the shared services with the other districts that are close to us,
Mhm.
like Frontier, possibly Eden, even the smaller ones, perhaps tying in with us might be beneficial to them. I don't know, you were pursuing that, I believe. I don't know if you've
Right.
done any more research.
We've looked, we haven't been successful in terms of finding that collaborative effort, but we'll continue looking at that. I think, that's part of where we're gonna be driven. I think part of all districts are gonna be driven to continue to look for those savings and consolidations.
Well, and that collaborative effort that you were looking for may not have been as critical to them last year either, and it might be more critical to them as it becomes more critical to us.
I think the problem you find with collaborative efforts is it sounds great, on paper. The problem is, because we're not all on the same calendar, and because we're not all on the same schedule, and some schools have block scheduling, and some schools have more periods than others, and they're, you know, we all don't go on the same calendar. It makes it very difficult. I know everybody's, I'm sure, Hamburg looked at this, you know, long before I came, and that's not to say you shouldn't keep looking. It's just not nearly as easy as they keep saying, well, you should have collaborative efforts with your neighboring districts, because it is very difficult
And
to
don't you
do.
have to put it through a vote anyway to the people if you decide that you're gonna share administration, like when you do your budget vote, doesn't that have to be? I read somewhere, I know that they were lobbying the state to try and get, you know, one administration for 3 or 4 countywide
Yeah.
school districts. That has to go to a vote, I believe, correct? I mean, I don't know.
If it were a
I
shared
didn't
athletic
research
director, I
it.
think it's one thing, but if it were,
No, I'm
saying share the whole
talking- right.
administration.
Yeah.
I think that's what
You're
you referred.
consolidating schools together, then yes.
Right.
I would
I
think
mean-
that would be a vote.
I think
Right.
it does, so
Yes, it
I
does.
think it's much more difficult than, you
Well,
know,
even within our
it's
school
nice
district, we
to-
talked about the whole redistricting thing, I mean, just the concept of trying to say, how do you try to balance the happiness of the Union Pleasant versus Boston Valley versus Charlotte versus Armour, and how do you try to save money by, you know, getting those to balance out either, you know,
But when you
everybody's
look
upset
at the
about which
numbers
driveway.
in whole buildings, I
Yeah,
mean,
which road is what pickup, and which side of the road is what bus route, and which little, you know, every little tiny activity, we're all intensely, you know, we all intensely love that which our school gives us, and it's gonna be very upsetting to everybody, you know, do you take away music lessons? I mean, that's a luxury that we have. You know,
Well,
there's
a lot of
there's no other
districts
place
are-
out there that has
A lot of
music
districts are
lessons.
having that discussion, just going back to the very basics, which you might have to do, given the financial environment.
And what are the very basics?
It's different for different people.
Right, right.
No,
Exactly.
yes.
That's the dilemma.
Well, it was Orchard Park that you reached out to on that AD
Correct.
position, and that ended up falling through. What about I think your point is well taken. What about merely looking for another district that would be a potential partner? If we merely went through and not thought about positions or anything else, but let's just identify, let's spend this year just identifying what district would be a potential partner to do that. They're facing this as well. And the smaller districts are probably have a bigger fixed cost to spread over a smaller number of bodies, so it's gonna be harder for them.
Mhm.
But if we,
But they have more accessibility grants, some of those smaller districts, because they may have, you know the North Collins district. The North Collins district, do they have a better financial basis for grants than we do now?
and is there talk of them merging with Eden, like some administrative services? Was that, I heard that from an Eden board member.
No, not really. I mean, what, they would look at things like, North Collins runs their own buses, so they reached out to neighboring districts to try to do some consolidation with bus runs and things that were out of district, and things like, because they have so few students, try to get an AP class, you got like 5 people in it. So then, you know, it's really hard sometimes for board members to say we should have this AP biology when there's 5 kids in it. There was AP classes like with 2 kids in it. So some of the things that they would try to do is to share classes, which was very difficult, didn't work with Eden because they have a totally different day. Their bell schedule is totally different. So I guess from my experience, I don't want to sound like a big naysayer, but it's very difficult to find a partner, so to
And our
speak.
schedule's very different. I don't know, we're the shortest school day around
Why?
than the other districts.
Well, no,
So-
we're at the elementary level.
The
we're short
elementary
because
we're
we're last
short.
in, first out for elementary.
Mhm.
But, you know, we also have a 9-period day. There are some schools that have 8-period days, so we have a 9-period middle school and high school day.
But we are
And all
shorter
those-
at the elementary.
Yes.
So like, I'm just saying what you said,
Yeah.
right there, we're shorter, K through 5.
But it sounds like we're better, though we have to keep our minds open to the option of
Yeah.
sharing people with
Mhm.
various and sundry people, we're better off to tighten our own belt right now and figure out where we can do things best ourselves, cutting whatever corners we can, and figuring out our priorities, and then if the opportunities arrive to link.
And we'll certainly explore those opportunities. I mean, we're not afraid to look at those opportunities and see where we can consolidate, you know, both internally and externally. I mean, those are things we'll continue to look at.
And when will we know on the energy thing, by the end of the year?
Yeah, we should have some pretty solid preliminary information, I'm hoping by January, the numbers.
Oh, by January,
Yeah.
okay.
I'm hoping to have a good report to the board and show you the progress on that at the January meeting.
Okay.
And are you also looking over your other suppliers, let's say for your paper, you know, stationary things, like usually, I think it was Staples, they were an energy company, and I think they were giving great discounts to school districts. I don't know if they do Hamburg, but they said they do the majority of the districts in New York State.
We do a lot of that through BOCES, don't we, or no?
No, actually, what we've done historically is we've purchased things on state bid. Office supplies, furniture, from A to Z. There's a lot of different thoughts on how to purchase. We also purchase through BOCES certain things like our technology, that does drive aid. So some districts competitively bid all of their supplies. It is quite the undertaking. We didn't do that in North Carolina when I first started, and we went in that direction, and they hated me for it. But it worked well. I'm not sure it works better than purchasing off state aid. Did I say state aid? State contract. Got state aid, totally stuck on my brain. State contract, state bid. So, and also you can also purchase through BOCES. They have a consortium where they'll bid all the items for you, and for, of course, a fee, because you have to pay for COSA. So, right now, we're looking at so many different things, and because purchasing off state contract isn't a bad way to do business, we're just gonna continue with that method for now. Not saying that we won't necessarily change that once we get around to really analyzing it.
Diane, I was in the school the other day, and we were filling out a grant for something, and I needed a piece of paper, and I asked the teacher, I said, they don't have any paper. That's one of the challenges I think we have. It's that supplies are in dire need. So I kind of chuckled when he said, don't we buy our paper somewhere? They don't even have paper at the high school.
I know, and it's so weird because
We need paper.
we work for a green company, and with everything being electronic, they say, oh, it's going to be paperless. But you should see all the paper we use it's just, how many reams of, I can't tell you how many boxes we go through a day, just in my area. It's amazing.
And it's killing me to see this projector still on me. I turn off the projector. Save some bulb life here for us.
Go ahead.
Yes, please.
About $3.25 off the contract.
Yes, Rick, I would expect that from Barbara, not from the HR guy, you know?
It's because I'm gonna tell you you can't buy any more bulbs. You're out of money, no bulbs for you.
Well, we will work on this information. We'll work to bring more information to you for our December 5th meeting, and
December 6th.
6th, I'm sorry, December 6th meeting, on the day off. If you have any questions or, want any more information as we go through this, please give me a call or send me an email, let me know.
The next meeting, December 6th is the next
Budget work session, and
session.
then December 13th is our regular meeting.
And December 13th at 12 o'clock is the school board lunch at Boston Valley. So stick that on your schedule the same day as the board meeting, the 13th. So for everyone,
Okay.
Lunch at where?
Boston Valley at 12 o'clock. So whoever's able to make that, please let us know, and let us know what you are interested in bringing. Other than that, can I have a motion to finish our meeting, to adjourn our meeting, a motion? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, meeting adjourned.
That was good, thank you. Very informative.
Here's information that somebody gave us, who gave it to us. Can I
You know what, I don't,
Here in the
you know what I was thinking with this, because I said we would just pass it, it's just an informational one. Would you mind
Call it a
just
day.
copying this?
What is it?
This is from one of
Why
the
not, it's
students.
fine to pass around, save money.
Yeah, but then he could just put it in the board update, and then it would go to all board members.